Hello and welcome to the fifth and sadly final edition of Kind July Conversations. My name is Jane Hutchin, and in a moment I'll be bringing out our wonderful guest, the founder of Streetside Medics, Dr. Daniel Noor. But before I bring him out, just a few housekeeping matters. You'll see on your screen, I hope, that there is a chat tab, and you can use that one if you want to send any comments or say hello or just tell me where you're dialing in from today. And you'll probably see next to it a Q&A tab, and that is where you can put your questions to Daniel, and that will be coming up in about 30 minutes from now. So you can think of some good ones for him. His organisation, of course, has been amazing for the homeless population in Sydney, and we're going to hear a lot more about that in a moment. But without further ado, let's bring out Daniel. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Jane. Thank you so much for having me today. It's such a pleasure and honor to be interviewed by one of the greats.
Oh, you're so generous and so kind.
Okay.
Daniel, you're looking wonderful. This is my first question to everybody because I'm really aware, we say I'm fine. We're in lockdown. We've been in lockdown for many months, at least, say 5 weeks,
yeah.
At least where we are. How are you really, Daniel?
Jane, I'm good. I am good. I think much like many people, I'm anxious, I'm tired, I'm worried, but overall, I think I'm good. And a big part of that is I'm very fortunate with the work that I have and the work that I do, that unfortunately I see people in far worse situations and conditions, and that perspective makes me realize that I'm actually doing quite good. So I think I'm doing okay.
And we're having some lovely greetings from our audience. Debbie says hi. Docklands, Victoria. David also says hello, tuning in from Sydney. And we do very warmly welcome everybody on this call tonight. Daniel, I wonder, when in your life have you thought most deeply about kindness?
That's a great question. Look, probably after my mum comes into my room and says, "Daniel, you need to be kinder to me." But no, I think it's probably in times when I haven't been treated with kindness, or I felt, the wrath of someone or something that I thought was unfair or unkind, and that gave me time to both reflect on the situation, but also reflect on my own personal kindness and how I am in that situation. So I think it's usually in times of affliction that I think about kindness, and I think about how either I'm being kind to people around me or why someone might not be being kind to me, because I think everyone has the potential, but also the foundation to be a kind person. No one's born unkind.
That's a great response. Daniel, a lot of people that you try to help must be going through, I asked you, how are you? But I wonder at times like this, what does a homeless person do in lockdown when you don't have a home?
Yes. Yeah. So look, fortunately, a few things. So our government has actually been quite amazing with regards to the population of people who are experiencing homeless, and they've paid for a number of hotels across the state so that they can get access to temporary accommodation. So fortunately, for the time being, a significant portion of them are in hotels, and that they're being cared for with some food and some services. But one of the most amazing things that I've realized about the population of people experiencing homelessness is I'm in a house and I've got lights and I've got materialistic objects around me, and I have so much that's attributing to my happiness and my sense of well-being. Now, these people experiencing homelessness sometimes have so little, but their sense of connection, their sense of happiness, and certainly their kindness towards other people is so great. And it makes me realize that despite them not having a lot, they have a lot. And they have a sense of community. And if you ever go up to someone who is experiencing homelessness and ask them for something, they're probably going to give it to you, even if they don't have much. So I think they're being taken care of, and their spirits are always quite high from what I can see.
We'll talk a lot more about Street Side Medics, your NGO, your charity, in a moment. But first of all, I want to get to know you a bit more. What were you like as a kid, Daniel? Were you loud? Were you a good student? Were you obedient?
I was quite the opposite, Jane. I was quite the opposite. My father has grey hair, and my mother says she has a lack of hair, and both of them are due to me. I was quite the opposite. I'm the younger of two, so I have one older brother, who, whilst growing up, was the goody goody of the family and the very smart one. And my family always went to him for advice and support. But we had a beautiful relationship, all of us. I was very, very cheeky. I was the class clown. I got suspended from many schools.
Really?
That's true. I was on the verge of being expelled from some of the schools, never for anything serious, but always just being the class clown, the loud-spoken one, and the teachers they really loved me but hated me at the same time. And actually, up until the verge of, I'd say, year 10 and 11, people always thought that I had potential, but I wasn't, very academic. I wasn't, killing it at school, or my grades weren't great. So I would say that I was probably maybe misunderstood throughout my youth.
Wow. Right. So that is interesting indeed. What do you think changed you, and when did that happen?
Look, I don't think there was ever a light bulb moment, but I think that I always loved the thought of being is the term the dark horse, the one that no one really expects to do well.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that I was last in biology in year 11, and that my teacher thought, this guy. And then when I was first in year 12, the feeling that I got was pretty amazing. And I remember always thinking, I know my own, not being egotistical, but I felt like I had the potential to do what I wanted to do. I always thought if I wanted to do something, I could achieve it. And so I think the motivation to prove others wrong or prove myself right was the driving force. And when it was time to show what I was capable of, which is year 11 and 12, mainly year 12, I pulled my socks up and I got my act together. And then after uni, I don't know what happened, but I just started to mature and behave myself.
Why did you choose medicine?
It's a great question. For a few reasons. So I actually always wanted to pursue a career in law for most of my life. And it was because when I was young, a friend of mine's father was a lawyer, and I thought that was really cool. And I was always good at arguing, as my parents said, and I used to debate. And I thought, being a lawyer was walking into a court debating with a nice briefcase. And I realized that wasn't the case. I was somewhat, into that side of things, but I'm more than anything, through my brother, who had some medical issues, but also my grandmother, got to witness the impact that a doctor can have, and the impact that health services have. And I actually realized that without one's health, we really don't have much. And so the aspiration to make a difference in someone's life, to really contribute to my community and to society as a whole, and also to challenge myself. I knew it was a tough career, and I knew that it would require quite a lot of me, emotionally, intellectually, and it felt like a challenge, and I was up for it.
And eventually you started to specialize in cardiology. And I think that was the time that you went to train in the UK. Tell me about your first experience with a homeless person there.
So I'm still in pursuit of cardiology as we speak. And I decided in my fourth year of medical school that was a career that I wanted, and it was black and white. There was no second option. So the best cardiologists are at Imperial College in London, that do quite a lot of research. So I went to London, and I was living there for a few months. And I was living in Waterloo in student accommodation. And I walked out of the train station. I was working at Hammersmith. And as I walked out, there was a crowd. And I thought, what's going on? So I went over there, and there was a homeless gentleman who was having a seizure. And people were fumbling and not really sure what to do. And so I approached and I just did my very basic first aid training as a final year medical student, my ABCs that I knew to keep him safe, and made sure that paramedics were on their way. And surely enough, they came very quickly and they took him away. But I had a conversation with some of the people that were surrounding him, and a number of them were actually homeless themselves. And I remember this one lady who was quite pale, quite hectic. I just remember her so vividly. And I was talking to her and saying, what's the situation? What happened? And she goes, he's been having these seizures for the last few months, and we're normally just in the back alleyways, and not many people see it, and he doesn't want to go see any doctors, and he doesn't really drink any alcohol. He doesn't really do any drugs, and but he continues to have these seizures. And this gentleman was probably in his 40s or his 50s. And I asked her, well, why haven't you taken him to see the doctor? Like, why don't you take ownership of that? Or why does he not want to go and see the doctor? And this was her words, not mine, but her words were, Daniel, the NHS, they barely care about you, let alone us.
So that's the Australian equivalent of sort of Medicare, except it's probably more public than our system.
Exactly. And I explored that further, and she really had a sense that at least grossly to society, but certainly to the healthcare system, she felt like a second-grade citizen. She felt like the healthcare system would care less for her, and that her interest or their medical interest was of less value than any other person in society. Now, I was reassured to know that he was on his way to hospital, and I was confident in, the fact that he would be adequately investigated, which he was. But that just continued to dwell on my mind. I've been volunteering for a food service for, 6 or so years, part of my church here in Sydney. Mm-hmm. And I always used to think, you hand them some food, and then you think, what else is going on in this person's life? Like, is there diabetes in their system? Is there cancers? Is there heart issues that they don't know about? And so with the interaction in London and the feeling inside of me that, why does this lady feel that way? I did my research in Sydney and realized that there were challenges and there were barriers that limited access to healthcare. And that's in a country where we genuinely have the best healthcare system in the world. And so it was a bit of a light bulb moment. And with, the support of quite a lot of people, including the board of Streetside Medics, the Streetside Medics was born.
Wow. So how quickly did that happen after you came back from London? Because I remember I lived in London for a bit too, and I remember at that time I found the homeless population in London to be far in excess of the homeless population in Australia. But that has changed in the last few years. I'm noticing people with living with homelessness everywhere.
Yes. It was very confronting in London. And Sydney, unfortunately, has become much the same. It is very confronting. So I was in London from February till about June of 2019. And then I started working on it pretty much straight away. I was a bit cheeky in the way that I went about it, in the sense that I would call people or corporations and say that I had the other person involved, and managed to get everyone involved that way because they thought that the other person was involved. And then all of a sudden the idea was born. And I kind of put my own money where my mouth was. And by about, I'd say, November, the idea was very real. By February, we were registered as a charity and a business, and we had Clayton Utz as our law firm who were acting for us pro bono. And then by June the following year, so a year from when I had returned to London, the van was on the streets and was starting to serve.
So that we're talking about last year now, June of last year.
Correct.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And Daniel, you also had a contact with a homeless person after you got back to Australia. It was after you'd been out for I don't know if it was a big night, but let's say a dinner with friends.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I remember it very clearly. I was in Newtown with some friends, about 5 or 6 of my friends, and for some reason I was feeling generous at the end of it, and I paid the bill. And it's probably because we always fight about who's going to pay anyway. So I just went early and paid the bill and went to the bathroom. And that was about $500 or $600. And it felt good to do that for my friends. But the next day, it was a Saturday, and I was driving towards the city. And I was at the intersection to turn into Bondi or left into Ultimo. And there was a gentleman who came to wash the windscreen. Now, I genuinely, as a 26-year-old, or at the time 24-year-old person, never carry cash. I just don't do it. I always have Apple Pay. So I told him that I didn't have any money and that I was very sorry. And he was younger. He was probably about 30, and said, "That's okay. I'll clean your windscreen anyway." And he did. And I thought, okay, that's great. And then he went on to the car behind me. And then I realized that my barber only takes cash. And for that reason, I usually keep $20 in my glove box. And so I had $20 in my glove box. So I beeped at him, and he came back, and I gave him the $20. And this gentleman, he genuinely started to develop tears in his eyes and was telling me how much this $20 meant to him and how much of an impact this would make on his day. And the light turned green, and I drove off. But you can't get over that feeling. It was the most amazing feeling. And that feeling trumped any of the feeling that I felt the night before. I was with my friends. I was having great dinner. I was having drinks, and everything was fine. I spent all this money. But the next day, I gave someone $20, which, not trying to sound rude, but didn't mean all that much to me. It was just $20.
But you made his day. Exactly.
I made his day, and it really meant a lot to him. And that feeling really resonated with me. The feeling of giving someone something it was a very beautiful feeling. And I've been in pursuit of that feeling ever since, I guess.
And we've just had a comment that I'd like to read out at the moment, Daniel, from Yumi, who works with the Older Women's Network. And she's pointed out that homelessness is a huge problem with older women. And
Yes.
it's apparently Homelessness Week in next week. Are you aware of that as you see the people who come to your van to seek medical help?
So one of the things that it breaks your heart is the older population, and that's something that's been quite apparent to me. So I'll tell you a situation that was only last Monday, which was a 78-year-old male who came in just to ask if we knew of somewhere that he could sleep. And we took him into the van. We were explaining to him, what we did, and he said that he had been living in his car for the last 8 or 9 years because he couldn't afford his rent anymore at DY. And that he had a problem with his car, and that he couldn't turn it on to get the heater working. So he just wanted to place to sleep for a night. And the night before, he had slept out on the streets rough, and it was too cold. And he went to the travel lodge, and they asked for $200, and he said, "I can't afford that." So we managed to get him accommodation for 15 days and support him in that process. And in the 8 or 9 years before that, he had never asked for any support, not a dollar, nothing. He'd never gotten any housing. So I think it is becoming more apparent that for some reason in Australia, whether it be inability to get work in the elderly population or the increased cost of living and housing, there is an increasing number of people above the age of 55 who are becoming homeless. Obviously, the majority is 25 to 54, but the older population is becoming more apparent, as well as the younger population, which is even more scary. And especially during school season, they're protected by school, but outside of the school season, they appear to be not protected by the school system and out on the streets.
It's an awful blight on all of us. One feels so helpless to know what to do. Yeah. Daniel, I have to point out that you run Streetside Medics as a sort of night job, really, because you have a regular day job, don't you? You work at the North Shore Hospital. I mean, what is it? Did you not feel you were busy enough?
No, I've never known different, to be honest with you. Since, I guess, my entire career as a doctor, Streetside Medics has been my baby, and I've been growing it. And I like to stay busy. Otherwise, I might start misbehaving again and reverting to my childhood days. But no, you're right. I have my full-time job at Royal North Shore Hospital, and Streetside Medics is my passion on the side. And at times I do get tired, and at times I do wish that I had some time off. But This is a privilege to me. The people that I interact with, I feel blessed to interact with. The volunteers that I work with, I feel lucky to work with them. And I think it's genuinely an honor for me to be involved in a project that's much bigger than me and probably always has been.
So what happens is that you have this amazing van that's kitted out with some really state-of-the-art devices and medicine, and you go to different areas in Sydney. I'm presuming at the moment you're not out and about because of COVID, is that right?
That's not right. So the one thing that I've realized is trust takes a long time to build in this population. And that a lot of the times people will offer help when it's convenient. And certainly now is not a convenient time, but both due to the fact that it's healthcare and due to the fact that we've built trust with a number of people who are very vulnerable and experiencing homelessness, we're continuing our services.
You're an essential service.
We're an essential service, exactly. We've obviously taken COVID safety protocols and reduced the number of volunteers, but we continue our service even when it's tough, whether it's rain, hail, sunshine, or COVID, we're there.
So you speak about the importance of gaining trust. Tell me, when this van rocks up, why do people come inside? Why do they tell you about their problems when they're probably, many of them are quite distrusting?
Yeah, that's very true. So look, there's a few reasons. So the first reason is that it is by nature and by design opportunistic. It is a service that goes and joins the food services and the shelters, and it's free of charge and there's no need for Medicare. And as you said, we have a lot of equipment in there, so we can actually make meaningful and impactful change in their life and their healthcare. That's the first reason. The second reason is our volunteers. They're all amazing. We've got quite a young cohort of volunteers, but obviously the full range of age. And we approach people not to bring them to the van, and not with the intention of providing them a service, but purely with the intention of just having a chat with them and building some rapport.
Wow.
And that's our only objective. Approach them, have a chat, build some rapport, and build that trust and build on that relationship. And then when that reaches a point where you can introduce the service, then you do that. And there's no pressure. We're there every single week and we're happy to wait. And so sometimes it takes weeks, if not months, for someone to build up the trust and or the courage to say, okay, I'm ready to come into the van. And I'm ready to see what's going on. A lot of the times they don't want to know what's going on in their health. And so also making sure that they know that you're there to support them through their health journey. You're not just going to label them with a condition and then leave.
Daniel, we're going to have a little bit of a break in your amazing story because I have been compiling a kindness list for the last 5 weeks of July. And I want to read you out what we've got, and everybody's contributed to it, which has been fantastic. So we've got be friendly, be helpful, listen, stop criticizing, don't control others, rise above retaliation, be courteous in traffic. That's a special favorite of mine. Mrs. Governor General said, just say hello. Mr. Governor General said, be slow to judge. And he got a second one because he's pretty important. He also said, be considerate of others. Yeah. Grace Tame gave us, be patient. Eddie Wu gave us the importance of forgiveness. And Catherine Wolfgram had be generous with your time. And last week, Dummy Im, the singer, said, give people the benefit of the doubt. I love all of those. And I wonder, would you like to contribute to that list?
I would love to, Jane. And look, I must admit, I'm of Middle Eastern background. So I'm Egyptian, which means that it's in our blood to negotiate and to try and make a deal. And I couldn't decide which one I want. So I'm going to give you two. The first is going to be vulnerable, and that's something that I personally struggle with and something that I think is quite important. And the second thing is to inject hope.
Wow. They're great. You can have both of those. They're both going on the list. Thank you so much. So why, may I ask, do you have a problem with being vulnerable or being seen to be vulnerable?
I think it's very uncomfortable. No one likes a position of vulnerability. And I guess I've always, unfortunately, seen it as a weakness. But I objectively realize that it is a strength, and it is a strength to be vulnerable. And I remind myself of that many times. And I've witnessed that in the service that we provide with a lot of the people that we see who are in quite a tough situation. When I am vulnerable with them, and I show them that I'm only human, and I'm only not talking to them from a position of superiority, but I'm on the same level as them, and I make similar, if not worse, mistakes. Um, they seem to appreciate that.
That's fantastic. So we have got about 5 more minutes left of this interview. So I want you all to think about the questions that you're going to dominate this conversation with in about 5 minutes' time. We will finish at 7:45, but I'm looking forward to hearing what you want to know from Daniel. Daniel, you know, a lot of the time people see kindness as something a bit fluffy. And I was wondering whether there was a particular thing in your life that really underscored the real meaning of kindness, because I know you're also a very devout person. Was kindness for you in a way attached to your upbringing and your culture and your religion?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always grown up as a Christian, a Coptic Christian, and one of the stories that I was told as a child was sort of our King and our Savior washing the feet of his disciples. And if that isn't an act of kindness, then I don't know what is. It has always been part of my upbringing. My parents are very kind people. And I see that because they serve my brother, myself, and my father the food before my mum serves herself, and my dad would do the same. And it's subtle things like that that have always resonated with me. My dad spent a large portion of his adult life trying to support his family or his friends back in Egypt. And if he hears about vulnerable people, he won't tell us. And a lot of the times I won't know about what he's done through him, but other people will approach me and say, your dad did this for me or did that for me. And that certainly resonates with me. And I think I don't think much of myself, but if I'm anything, it's a product of my parents and my brother.
Well, I'm sure you are being way too humble, and we can see some of the great work that you've done. What in the days and the nights that you spend out and about on the streets of Sydney, what particularly surprises you about some of the people that you meet?
The stories are unbelievable, and they're not the typical pathway that you'd think. I think I've been surprised and shocked to hear of people that lived a very normal life and were very much parts of society. And there was a gentleman who I got to know who was in his 30s, who was a lawyer, very successful lawyer with a law firm and a number of partners in his law firm, and was part of a wealthy family. And the whole time he felt like he didn't want to do law, but his parents were supporting him in that. And then he started working at a law firm, and then his parents bought the law firm for him, and then his parents started to grow the law firm for him. And then this whole time he had a sense of disconnection from that and some underlying mental health issues. And then after a relationship breakdown, he turned to drugs to try and fill a huge void in his life. And now this is a person that you literally look 4 years before, you'd see him and he'd be the token successful person in society. And then 4 years later, he's sleeping under a bridge in Woolloomooloo. And it's hard to believe that something like that could happen to someone, or that someone could be so close to experiencing such a vulnerable position. And I think it's surprising to see that sometimes all it takes is one bad mistake. Sometimes it takes one misjudgment, and sometimes you're so close to being in a state of homelessness that it's hard. It's hard not to sympathize with them.
Absolutely. Look, I'm guessing that at times you yourself set out with a kind mindset. Something happens to kind of rock the boat. I wonder, what is it that challenges your motivation to be kind?
Well, I think it's a few reasons, but as I said earlier, I one other than the fact that it feels good to be kind,
Mm.
um, evidently, but I don't think anyone. I think at a baseline, we're all kind people, and that we all would love to show love and mercy to other people. And if someone isn't the same back to you, something's going wrong. Something's going wrong in their life, and they're unhappy about something. And so I feel like at times when I've been rejected or treated unkindly, I never look at it as the person is being unkind to me, but the person's going through something quite tough, and I feel sorry for them, and I hope that whatever's going on in them gets better. And that motivates me to stay kind and not to retaliate in a way that may be nasty, because there's no need.
And I'm sorry if you can hear planes. They've switched the flight path, and I'm just getting one after another planes coming overhead. So apologies if that sound is bleeding through. I'm going to throw the floor open to questions now. And we've got one question already. So the rest of you, I think you need to buck up there. The question is from Annie, and she says, loving your session. Would you please share why you think simple kindness is the most meaningful?
So I think I like my anecdotes, and I'm going to give kindness in an anecdote. I think society, people, situations is like a sort of piece of leather that hasn't been conditioned in a long time and might even be unusable. And kindness is the conditioner that you give just to soften it and make it usable and make it soft. I think it's a very easy and a very practical way to interact with others. And I think that it's a standard that when you hold yourself, others will start to exemplify. And it really injects love and well-being into other people.
That's a great response. Thank you. Kristen has asked, is there something that you can suggest to help young people be more kind?
So I think kindness is also an asset. I mean, have you ever heard of someone being spoken about negatively because they were kind, or not being given a job because they were kind, or not having friends because they were kind? I think that it's an asset, and that's something you should generously try and achieve, is to be a kind person and to show kindness and generosity to others, because it can help you develop into the person you want to be and help you in any endeavor you want, whether professional or personal.
I must put a question to you that was raised a couple of weeks ago by our Kind July guest, Catherine Wolfgram. I've been thinking about this actually. She said that she saw her grandparents, who were really kind, and she grew up with them. She saw kindness as being a form of weakness because she saw people kind of walking all over them because they were kind. And I think I can relate to that feeling when I was growing up, to think, why isn't that person being strong and standing up to them instead of giving them money or, doing something for them? I wonder, do you ever kind of have that dichotomy, or did you ever think that way, that maybe kindness, when we're young, we construe that as a kind of weakness?
I certainly think as a child I could relate to that, but I think the older I grow, the more I see the wisdom in not doing that, and to remain kind and not to retaliate. I think as the Bible verse of "turn the other cheek" is often more satisfying and more gratifying. And so no, I certainly could relate to that.
Yumi has asked, she said, thank you to you and your volunteers for your amazing work. As a woman of colour, the concept of being vulnerable is a difficult one because she has to battle discrimination based on her gender and her ethnicity. Do you think being vulnerable is an option for people, especially women of colour?
That's a very good question, and I guess sad and disappointing to hear that that's something that someone has to face in the 21st century. I certainly think being vulnerable is an option for people of color and women, because I don't think you have anything to feel negative about, nor anything to feel inferior or at all as a weakness. But I think acknowledging what you are and being proud of it, and for me, that's, if anything, probably a way of differentiation, which is a positive. And whether that can be viewed as vulnerability or whether that is pride in who you are, I think it's important.
That's a great answer. Thank you. A lovely question here from Rachel. Now, this is going to be hard for you. So, Daniel, I need you to take your humble hat. We're just going to move it off to the side and put it down for a minute. Rachel has asked, you're very inspirational and well done. Is there a standout moment you've had from your work on the streets, or a moment where you've directly seen the impact of your work? I think that's a wonderful question.
Absolutely. There was one lady who I met in Manly, who had been homeless for 9 years, living on in train stations. And she had left her family due to a gambling issue, and she had a lot of guilt about the situation, and she was very resentful of herself. She came to see us for quite a bad infection of her leg, which had gone untreated for many weeks, because 4 years prior she went to a GP and the receptionist told her that Medicare was expired and that she didn't have Medicare. Long story short, she came to see us with this infected leg, which was very bad. We offered her to get her accommodation that night, but when realizing how bad it was, we suggested that she in fact go to the hospital. I drove her to the hospital myself. I stayed with her in the waiting room. I spoke to the ED attendant to make sure that she could be well taken care of, because unfortunately, sometimes when someone presents as homeless, that can have impacts, which is a shame. And then she stayed in hospital for a month. We bought TV for her in the hospital, and which was, a small thing that made a big difference to her, and checked in on her every week or two. And then at the end of her stay, her leg was much, much better, but she was going to go back to being homeless, because all that hospital can offer is a number for Link to Home and supporting them in doing that when they leave the hospital. And realizing that wasn't good enough, we managed to get her housing, permanent housing. So she left that hospital into a permanent house in Fairfield, where she has been ever since, and continued to communicate with her, support her, get her clothed, get her in touch with Centrelink and all the other service providers. And there was a photo of her recently on our Instagram, you may see, but very proud of that, because she's someone who, I guess the saying that I try and tell my volunteers, if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? And in her case, we just had to really take ownership and take pride in what we were doing for her and go above and beyond for her. And she has made a 180-degree turn and is now actively looking for work, and hopefully soon to re-engage with her family. And she's just found out that she's a grandmother of a few-month-old. So the potential impact for her is amazing.
Demonstrates so perfectly what kindness can do, and how it's such a two-edged thing, isn't it? The person who is kind gets something, and the person who receives kindness gets something. That's wonderful. Thank you. Alex has a great question. Alex asks, what can people in Sydney, and I'm sure in other cities do, to be more kind to the homeless population more routinely rather than just when convenient?
It's a great question. So I think there's two things that I would say. So the first thing that we always, and I always used to do, was I'd be standing up and I'd see someone sleeping on the side of the street, and I'd say, do you need anything? And they might say a bottle of water or nothing. But I think prior to doing that is to literally get down on their level. So to squat down or to sit down next to them and ask for approval to talk to them, because you are stepping literally into their home, and then just have a chat with them. I think that's the best thing and the kindest thing that you could do for them, is just have a chat. Show them that you care and show them that you're there to get to know them and just to engage with them. And I think a lot of the times, you will see someone on the side of the street asking for money, or someone that's homeless, and we just walk right past and they'll ask you, sorry, can I have some money? And you sometimes don't even respond. Even if you don't have money to give them, just look them in the eyes and realize that that's a human being in front of you in a time of need asking you for something, and recognize them and apologize. If you don't want to give them money, or if you don't have money, just say, I'm very sorry, but I can't give you money. So I think that's probably the first thing. And the second thing is just treat them like you'd want to be treated.
That both really good pieces of advice. Thank you very much for that. Cavi has asked, do you ever feel like there are moments when it takes an emotional toll on you, and what do you do to recharge?
Absolutely. Yeah, big time. There are times when I feel burnt out and emotionally drained, and I think I go back to my basics at the time, and that's three things, and that's spend time with my family, with my beautiful girlfriend, and with my friends, and also to spend time by myself, and just enjoy being by myself. I think that's probably the best thing that I've ever learned, is to enjoy my own company.
That's a great answer. And another question from, I think it's from the beautiful Cassandra in question. What can we do to support street side medics?
See, I told you she's good, right? So a few things. First and foremost, just awareness and support of the organisation is one of the main things we could ask for. We are 100% volunteer based. There isn't a single person that gets paid a single dollar, and we don't have any head office or anything like that. So donations go a big way, and they go directly to support people who are experiencing homelessness. And if you'd like to volunteer, we actively take volunteers and actively looking for GPs and nurses. So if there are any out there, we'd love some.
And Kristen again asks, do you have any ideas on ways to show kindness to others while in lockdown?
I would say, practically speaking, two things. One is check in on them, even if it's just I'm thinking of you. I know that I always appreciate it when I get a message from my friends just to say I'm thinking about you, and to know that you're on someone's mind. And sometimes just a small, my love language seems to be gifts. And so, obviously you can't buy anyone anything, but or deliver it to them. But if it was a coffee, or if it was buy something small and send it to them, or just an act to show them that you care for them and that they're on your mind.
Do you think that homelessness will ever be eradicated?
So I ask myself the same question. I really don't know why in this 21st century we're still talking about homelessness. I don't know the answer to that question. It's very challenging. And I will stay optimistic and say that I really hope so. But the realities of this world is that it can be large, it can be dark, and it can be lonely. And that it's up to us to support people and to be kind to them and to be generous to them and to reinstill hope in society. And so I hope that one day the answer will be no.
It's a troubling thing, and particularly as some of us are in winter, you think of people going to sleep out on the streets. It's freezing, it's desolate, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. Times are definitely hard. But Daniel, you have lifted us up, and I'm getting messages of thanks. Russell says, thank you so much for this wonderful interview. I've got so much admiration for all that you are and all that you do, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you, Russell.
And that really brings us to the end of this final Kind July Conversations. And who better to talk to than Dr. Daniel Noor? You've shared with us your setting up of Street Side Medics, your passion for this, which I know will go on and on and on, because you're someone who is very self-motivated and never gives up. But thank you to all of you for listening to this conversation. It's nearly the end of Kind July, but we'd love to hear from you at staykind.org. Find out what's going on. Please donate if you can. And we'll be back very soon with more news and more ways to share kindness, to stay kind. Daniel, thank you again for your time tonight, and we wish you all the very best.
My pleasure. Thank you, and thank you to the team at Stay Kind.
Good night.